6 miles off Okinawa, the attack transport USS Goodhue led 15 other ships in a tight formation, more than 1,000 troops packed below decks waiting to land. 3 days earlier, kamikazes had sunk a dozen ships just 15 miles from here, and every man aboard knew it. Destroyers prowled the edges, sonar teams strained for a whisper of contact, and lookouts swept a sky they no longer trusted. Then 12 new shapes burst from the clouds, engines screaming toward the convoy. Those were only the ones they could see. By April 1945, after more than 5.5 years, the war in Europe was winding down to its inevitable conclusion. Meanwhile, all the way in the Pacific, though United States Navy victories had obliterated Japan's outer defenses, they had finally brought the home islands within bomber range. Despite these triumphs, the war was far from over. American commanders knew that the Japanese still held thousands of miles of territory. Their fleet, though battered, remained a lethal threat to any invasion force. The Joint Chiefs of Staff weighed every path that might force Japan's surrender. They considered bypassing the Philippines, advancing through China, or occupying Formosa, modern-day Taiwan, but ultimately settled on a direct drive through the Western Pacific. That plan called for successive landings in the Philippines, Iwo Jima, and finally Okinawa. Situated barely 350 miles from Kyushu, it was the final barrier before the mainland itself. To the planners in Washington, capturing the island meant a base for the invasion of the home islands and an airfield close enough for B-29s and escort fighters to operate without any constraint at all. The 5-week-long fight for Iwo Jima would be brutal, costing nearly 7,000 American lives to secure an island only 5 miles long. Meanwhile, in the Philippines, American and Filipino troops were still battling to clear the last Japanese garrison when attention shifted northward to the next objective, Okinawa. For the Japanese, it meant something very different. If Okinawa fell, the path to Tokyo would lie open, so it was to be defended with every aircraft, ship, man, and idea they had left, no matter how outlandish. Inside Tokyo's war rooms, commanders argued over how to respond and stop the American advance at any cost. Some demanded an immediate counterattack to throw the Americans back into the sea. Others called for a long, grinding defense that would bleed the invaders dry. Then someone proposed a much darker alternative: the mass use of kamikazes, massed waves of planes and explosive boats sent on one-way missions. It was this plan, combined with Japan's determination to fight to the very last moment, that American soldiers and sailors would face at Okinawa. Isolated sacrifice attacks against American warships were reported as early as 1943, but they were rare and highly improvised. The idea was later formalized by Imperial Vice Admiral Takajiro Onishi, who organized a series of special units of pilots highly trained to crash their bomb-laden aircraft directly into enemy vessels. The first strike of this kind took place in October 1944, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, when one of Onishi's pilots destroyed the escort carrier USS Goodhue. What had once been a desperate measure had become a full-scale strategy. The Americans were about to face an air assault unlike anything they'd encountered in the war. In the fall of 1944, as Japan prepared its defense of Okinawa, American planners were finalizing their own offensive, codenamed Operation Iceberg. On May 31st of the same year, the Navy launched USS Goodhue, a Bayfield-class attack transport built precisely for this type of mission. These ships were part of a new generation that served as the backbone of every major landing in the Pacific, bridging the gap between the Navy and the Army by delivering fighting men and their equipment straight to hostile shores. Her design reflected that purpose. She carried 2 5-inch dual-purpose gun mounts fore and aft, able to engage both aircraft and surface targets, along with 2 single and 2 twin 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft guns and 18 20mm Ehrlichens to fend off attacking aircraft at close range. Her 51 officers and 524 enlisted men manned the ship, maintained her armament, and oversaw the transport of more than 1,200 troops with their gear. Stowed along her sides and decks were a little over a dozen landing craft, each able to ferry men and supplies from ship to shore once the beaches were secured. Power came from a single General Electric gear-drive steam turbine, producing 8,500 horsepower, giving the 492-foot vessel a top speed of around 18 knots. Though not built for direct combat, Goodhue was a durable steel machine, capable of bringing the invasion force to the front line, landing it under fire, and then evacuating the wounded, ready to retreat and be ready for the next assault. During the ship's shakedown cruise off the coast of California in December 1944, the crew tested Goodhue's guns against a towed target and practiced basic maneuvers. According to Ward MacDonald, then a 17-year-old sailor, many recruits, unaccustomed to the sea, spent much of the trip seasick, while the veterans tried to keep the decks clear, stating, quote, "What a sight. I was wondering if they would even allow us to join other ships for a wartime effort. Somehow we made a successful shakedown." After this, the crew loaded ammunition, supplies, and fuel for their first deployment. Among the cargo were large crates filled with heavy coats and rain gear, leading most men aboard to believe the ship was bound for colder waters, perhaps Alaska or the Aleutians. Only when Goodhue cleared the California coast and turned southwest into the Pacific did the truth become clear. The cold weather gear had been a deliberate ruse, as the ever-secretive Navy wanted any outside observer to think the convoy was heading north. A little over 2 weeks later, she reached the Admiralty Islands, a remote Allied base north of New Guinea, used to stage men and supplies for the advance toward the Philippines. There, she took on more cargo and passengers before turning back to sea, her wake catching the last light as she steamed west into the Pacific. On February 4th, 1945, USS Goodhue reached Hollandia, a crucial Allied base in New Guinea in the South Pacific, where the ship received her new commander, Captain J.L. Allen, a seasoned naval officer, well known for his calm demeanor under pressure and extensive experience in amphibious operations. Under his command, the attack transport would take her place as the flagship of Transport Division 51, an elite unit responsible for delivering troops and equipment to assault beaches across the Pacific. Transport Division 51 ships formed the first wave of every invasion, and as the flagship, Goodhue always led the column, guiding the formation toward shore. Though it was an honorable position, it was also fraught with danger, as the lead ship always drew the first enemy fire and carried the highest risk. Every man aboard knew that when the attack began, Goodhue would be the first in and the first exposed. After reaching Leyte Gulf in early February, Goodhue spent several weeks ferrying supplies between bases, while her crew practiced amphibious landings under simulated fire, and everyone aboard knew what was coming next: Okinawa. On March 21st, Goodhue finally joined the invasion convoy and set sail north. Before reaching the main island, the task force stopped at Kuramaretto, a small group of islets just south of Okinawa, to secure a staging area for the assault. Though the landings on March 26th met little resistance, the calm didn't last. Within just hours, Japanese aircraft and fast explosive boats began probing the anchorage. As Sailor MacDonald recalled, quote, "Hell was upon us in every fashion. From the water, we had the dreaded boats. From the air, the kamikaze. And on the beaches, we had the fanatics. It was not to be a breather for anyone. We encountered 82 air attacks in the next 30 days alone. The reason for all this attention was we were getting very close to the main Japanese strongholds. They would throw everything they had at us. From that point on, the skies above Kuramaretto burned almost every night, and the Goodhue's crew understood that the real battle had already begun." On the last days of March, Goodhue headed to anchor off Kubashima, positioning herself for the assault to come. On April 1st, 1945, the largest amphibious invasion of the Pacific War began. More than 1,300 ships crowded the waters off Okinawa, carrying nearly 200,000 troops from the United States 10th Army. Battleships and cruisers pounded the beaches with 500,000 shells, while waves of landing craft ferried soldiers and Marines toward a shoreline lined with hidden guns and fortified caves. It was the opening move in what would become the bloodiest battle of the Pacific, fought for control of an island barely 70 miles long. The pre-landing barrage began at 5:30 a.m., a thunderous crescendo that rolled across the water as naval guns hurled shells into Okinawa's defenses. Overhead, 64 aircraft from the nearby carrier groups roared in to strike the landing zones, dropping bombs and strafing suspected positions before wheeling back toward their carriers. Landing craft, already lowered from their davits, circled in wide patterns through the crowded anchorage, waiting for the signal to form up and make their run toward the beach. By the end of the day, a large 15,000-yard beachhead was firmly in Allied hands, and thousands of troops had landed. For these men landing that warm spring Sunday, the island seemed one step closer to home and to the end of the war. Just past 4:15 p.m. on April 2nd, Transport Goodhue weighed anchor and pulled away from Kubashima. She was carrying the 307th Infantry Regiment of the US 77th Division to the beaches of Okinawa. The ship steamed northeast in a tight 3-column formation, 15 transports moving in disciplined rows across. Goodhue commanded the right column, her position as flagship putting her at the head of the line. Behind her, at precise 1,200-yard intervals, came her sister attack transports, Telfair, Montreal, Drew, and Montrose, each vessel heavy with troops and equipment. 600 yards to port, the center column advanced under the guide ship Chilton, another Bayfield-class transport, while another 600 yards beyond that, the attack transport Henrico led the left column. The formation moved as one, engines thrumming in unison, while destroyers prowled their flanks, their crews scanning the horizon for periscopes or the telltale feather of a torpedo wake. As the convoy closed in on the combat zone, the captains gave the order to zigzag, and the bows swung gently left, then right, then left again. Though the maneuver slowed their progress, no leader was willing to hold a straight line this close to Okinawa. By then, the sun hung low on the western horizon, casting long shadows across the decks. Men stood at their battle stations, eyes turned skyward, fingers resting near triggers and loading mechanisms. The air tasted of salt and diesel exhaust. Somewhere in the distance, the rumble of naval gunfire drifted across the water as the bombardment of Okinawa continued without pause. Then, at approximately 6:30 p.m., Lookout spotted them, a dozen kamikazes. "12 of these planes, or perhaps more, black specks against the fading light, dove out of the clouds like hawks swooping on prey. From one minute to the next, alarm bells shrieked across every ship in the formation, and within seconds, the sky erupted in fire. Goodhue's gunners opened fire just past 6:37 p.m., her aft starboard 20 and 40mm batteries hammering out streams of tracers toward the kamikazes diving on the convoy from the starboard beam. All across the formation, gun crews swung their weapons skyward, filling the air with a wall of steel. 3 minutes later, at 6:40 p.m., Henrico took a diving hit amidships. The kamikaze punched through her superstructure in a blinding flash, the explosion tearing a gaping hole clean through the ship. Flames shot from both sides of the transport as smoke boiled upward. Only 2 minutes later, another kamikaze screamed in low toward Telfair, grazing her superstructure in a glancing blow before tumbling into the sea. Then, 3 more aircraft broke from the formation and committed to their attack runs, all 3 bearing down on Goodhue and Telfair. Combined fire from both transports caught the first kamikaze, shells tearing into the engine and fuselage until the aircraft disintegrated in midair, its burning wreckage spinning into the water. The second kamikaze held its dive straight into Telfair, and despite the wall of fire tracking it all the way in, the plane slammed into the ship's starboard and port king posts with a sickening crash, shearing through the heavy cargo booms before the broken aircraft tumbled over the side and vanished beneath the waves. But the third plane was headed straight for USS Goodhue. The aircraft diving toward USS Goodhue and her men was a Kawasaki Ki-45 Toryu, a twin-engine fighter bomber the Allies had codenamed Nick. This model, explicitly built for long-range escort and reconnaissance missions, carried 2 fragmentation bombs slung beneath its wings, each packed with enough explosive materials to shred absolutely everything within a 50-foot radius. Upon seeing it, Goodhue's forward 5-inch gun swung toward the approaching aircraft and opened fire. The first salvo caught the Nick, square in the port engine and cockpit area. Metal tore away from the cowling. Flames erupted from the engine nacelle, and black smoke began streaming behind the stricken plane. Fire crawled along the fuselage, fed by leaking fuel, turning the aircraft into a flying torch. But still, the Nick kept coming. In a matter of seconds, gunners across the convoy poured everything they had into the kamikaze. Tracers from Beaufort and Ehrlichans stitched lines of fire through the air, converging on the burning plane as it dove lower and lower. On deck, Signalman Ward MacDonald had been watching the Henrico burn, the flames and smoke pouring from the gaping hole in her side, when something made him turn. As he later recalled, quote, "From the corner of my eye, I caught sight of a huge ball of fire and mass descending upon me. I instinctively turned to my left and was ducking. The Nick slammed into Goodhue's main mast, around the level of the lookout or signal platform, before breaking apart and falling onto the ship, making a sound like a freight train derailing. The impact tore the aircraft apart instantly. One section of the fuselage, still trailing flames, continued its forward momentum and exploded right next to the fantail in a blinding orange fireball that sent debris and shrapnel spraying across the aft deck. The other section, containing the cockpit and at least one of the fragmentation bombs, swung violently to port and detonated at deck level. Men at their gun mounts were caught in the blast, while others were thrown backward by the shockwave, though most of the burning wreckage tumbled over the side and plunged into the water with a hiss of steam. Fires had already taken hold in multiple locations across the ship, coming closer and closer to spilled fuel, ignited torn fabric, and shattered wood. The explosion knocked men off their feet and sent Goodhue's 30-ton cargo boom, the massive steel arm used for loading and unloading supplies, crashing down onto the deck. Bomb fragments and pieces of the disintegrating aircraft rained down across the superstructure and open deck spaces. Below decks, in the cramped passageway just outside the engine room, electrician's mate 3rd Class Albert Boynton stood at his battle station. At 18 years old, the sailor from North Whitefield had learned quickly that his post was one of the most vulnerable on the ship. Kamikaze pilots aimed for 2 targets above all others: the bridge, to eliminate the officers and blind the ship, or the engine room, to leave her still in the water and helpless. Boynton's duties included the air and water cooling systems, as well as the lifts that raised and lowered the landing craft. When general quarters sounded, he moved to a station in the repair engine room, positioned just outside the main machinery spaces, where the turbines hummed and the heat pressed against every surface. When the Nick struck the mainmast at 6:50 p.m., the impact traveled through the entire ship. Steel groaned, rivets shuddered, and the deck beneath Boynton's boots bucked hard enough to throw him off balance. For a terrifying moment, he thought the hull had been breached below the waterline. Then came the sounds from above: shouting, the clatter of boots on ladders, the wail of sirens, all mixing with the crackle of flames. Soon, sailors began carrying bodies down through the hatches. The passageway where Boynton stood, wider than most aboard ship, became an improvised morgue. The general alarm had been wailing since the moment of impact, but damage control teams were already on the move. Men seized fire hoses and extinguishers, racing toward the flames as secondary blasts rattled through the decks and ammunition cooked off in the heat. Medics crawled over twisted metal to reach the wounded, their boots slipping in a mix of blood, oil, and seawater. By nightfall, at least 5 of the 15 transports that had left Garamaretto were burning or damaged. Telfar and Chilton had taken hits, while the destroyer Dickinson was struck on the bridge, taking the lives of 53 men, including her captain, before the ship was scuttled. Henrika was hit amidships by a twin-engine bomber, the explosion tearing through her superstructure and killing her commanding officer, a regimental colonel, and scores of men. Aboard Goodhue, 1/4 of her crew was gone, 27 lost sailors and 117 wounded. Most had been struck by bomb fragments and shrapnel when the attacking plane shattered across her deck. Furthermore, 24 soldiers from the 307th Infantry lay among the casualties. But despite all the damage, she persisted. After the April 2nd attack, Goodhue limped back to Garamaretto under her own power, with other damaged ships, and sheltered in a cove off the nearby island for about a week. Though scarred and burned, her hull was intact, and repair crews worked around the clock to patch the ruptured plating, clear debris, and restore her damaged equipment. The ships used machines to fill the cove with artificial fog, serving as a screen against air attacks. Even so, the Japanese would bomb the area at night. According to former sailor Boynton, quote, "We would hear at night 100 planes overhead. We'd wake up in the morning and see a ship on fire here, a ship on fire there." Within days, she was fit for duty again. On April 10th, she rejoined her transport squadron and resumed operations around Okinawa. She carried medical personnel to Ieshima on the 17th, and 3 days later approached the main island in darkness to land reinforcements before dawn. Enemy aircraft returned that afternoon, forcing her gunners to open fire once more as cargo operations continued under drifting smokescreens. By April 24th, her holds were empty, and 2 days later, Goodhue joined a convoy bound for Ulithi, her first real respite since the battle had begun. The battle for Okinawa marked the final and most brutal campaign of the Pacific War. Over 12 weeks of fighting, American forces seized an island only 70 miles long, at a cost unmatched in the theater. 3 dozen ships were sunk, and nearly 10,000 sailors were lost or wounded. The U.S. Army counted 4,675 casualties and close to 19,000 wounded, while the Marine Corps suffered a similar toll. Despite the losses, Okinawa's capture provided the Allies with a vast anchorage and airfields within striking distance of Japan. Still, the ferocity of the defense revealed what an invasion of the home islands might bring. As for USS Goodhue, by late June, she was back at sea, steaming through Inuitak and Ulithi before reaching Manila in July to disembark reinforcements. In early August, while preparing for another assault from Lingayen Gulf, a key message came through the radio. America had dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and Japan had finally surrendered. When the fighting ended, Goodhue's mission shifted from invasion to occupation. She carried troops to Sagami Bay in September and returned with nearly 1,000 liberated prisoners of war. Men from several nations who had endured years in captivity. Soon after, she joined Operation Magic Carpet, ferrying veterans home from the Philippines and the islands she had once helped to invade. For her role at Okinawa, USS Goodhue received a battle star. Decommissioned in 1946, she later sailed in civilian service as Hawaiian citizen for more than 3 decades. The ship is gone now, but her story and those who served aboard her endure as part of the long wake of the Pacific War.